It is Friday, and we are working for Crusoe, Friday, October 25th, 2024. In Los Angeles, he's Sam Park. In Reno, Nevada, Washoe County, the swingingest county across the fruited plain, I am John Ramey. We are recording this on Thursday, October 24th, for publication on Friday, the 25th. We're going to talk about the BRICS summit, big old meeting in Russia, in fact, the biggest since the start of their invasion of Ukraine. We've got a razor-thin margin election with Russian interference in Moldova. Boeing striking Boeing workers saying no to the latest offer. How we doing, Sam?
Terrific. How about you?
I love all the BRICS chatter. BRICS Plus was thrown around.
Yes.
Or
as they said on France 24, it's a ton of bricks.
That France 24 report was pretty good.
It was very good, actually, yeah.
Okay, for starters, they hold this in Kazan, Russia, which is in Tatarstan, excuse me. And that has been a place that has tried to be independent, did have a special kind of sovereign status that has since expired. It's really now just a state within Russia, right?
Yes, that's right. Yes.
But it is Muslim majority. And on the France 24 report, they were the experts were indicating this is so Vladimir Putin can play world leader and also see how aligned we are and what great solidarity we have with the global South. We're having this big thing in our Muslim majority state,
yes.
Which the optics of which I had not really considered. So, Sam, who is BRICS? Who are we talking about?
Well, BRICS was actually they started off as BRIC, which was Brazil, Russia, India, China. And as we've discussed in a previous episode, it was a term coined by a then, I believe, Goldman Sachs analyst named
a British fellow, right?
Yes, Jim O'Neill. And this was 20 years ago and more, where he thought that those four countries would generally just be good investment opportunities.
Developing economies.
They were developing economies. They were growing quickly. Their demographics were pretty good. And so he just thought that Goldman clients might investigate investment opportunities in those countries. And so one of the
that's sound advice 25 years ago.
Absolutely, right? And one of the outgrowths of O'Neill's recommendation was that these countries decided, well, if global capital is going to be flowing in because Goldman Sachs said it ought to, then maybe we should kind of get together and, make sure that we can manage this process so that, and I think the unspoken truth about this was that if we don't get together, these investors could try to sort of play us off against one another, which they definitely would, not because of any sort of conspiracy.
No, just the way it works.
That's right. And so they did. And then they decided to add South Africa, which now Lord O'Neill would certainly not have done at that time. But it became a sort of loose geopolitical entity.
Is there a constitution or articles of confederation? Nothing.
I don't think there is. No, and it is very loose, and it's difficult to see how that's going to change. For instance, India and China have always had problems with one another, although one of those problems, as we'll discuss, has been resolved as of this week. But again, they all, especially Russia, India, and China, the three of them, they're all right next to each other, and they're all very large countries. So I think India would sort of like to be involved in this regardless, just so that they're at the table, right? If the two largest countries in your neighborhood are kind of talking to each other, you kind of want to be there.
Right. So Russia and China and India are all on the same block.
That's right. And that is geographically.
Yeah.
Right.
Same,
and so,
yeah.
Brazil and South Africa were both large and growing, developing economies at the time. So it's not as if it's a nonsensical grouping, but there are certainly a lot of differences amongst these groups. And then, as we discussed last year, they've expanded, although not quite as much as they wanted to. They've added, I believe, 5 new members, which are
among them Argentina, Iran, Saudi Arabia.
Yes.
Who else?
Egypt
Egypt.
and Ethiopia.
There we go. Oh, of course.
Yeah. Although Argentina has pulled out. Right.
That's right.
Their new
Because the new president, the chainsaw guy, is a bit of an isolationist.
Javier Milei, as he's called.
Chainsaw guy.
Yes. Well, his actual name is Javier Milei. And so he pulled out of, so now there are 10 BRICS members, and they include both Iran and Saudi Arabia, who are normalizing relations, but have had a long history of poor relations. And I would say especially Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates, they're generally rather Western-leaning countries, and in many ways India is also for that matter. And so there's a lot of sort of misalignment amongst the BRICS members, especially now that they've expanded.
It's a cornucopia of maybe competing interests.
Yes, but they are all. I mean, let's face it; these are non-white countries, except for Russia.
Right.
And Russia likes to, since the time of the Soviet Union, has always sort of tried to ally itself with the non-Western world, right? And sort of champion their causes. And they still do quite a lot like this. And so the BRICS seem to be, and in many ways explicitly, posturing themselves as not anti-Western, but a sort of counterweight to Western, counterweight to Western influence. And
okay. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, you go. Please go right ahead.
All right. So this is Reuters reporting Kazan, Russia. Biggest such summit in Russia since Russia's been isolated because of their decision to illegally invade Ukraine. But Putin gets to host Xi, president of China, Modi, leader of India, Erdogan was there, leader of Turkey.
As a guest, yes, they're not a member.
Right. But the UN Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, was also in attendance.
Yes.
Now, that's its own discussion. But Mohammed bin Salman was not there.
Correct.
Okay. Now, they noted that on the France 24 report, which I'll include in the show notes on YouTube. What's the significance of that?
Of MBS not showing up?
Yeah.
I think he just sort of wants to, well, first of all, he's kept kind of a low profile ever since the war started in the Middle East. He was very visible up until that time, right? And so, but for the past year, he hasn't been quite so visible as he was before.
And of course, his country was on the brink of normalizing relations with Israel right before October 7th.
They were said to be on that brink, yes. Okay.
So politically for him, he probably can't be very involved.
Well, I mean, I'm sure he sent a delegation, but yeah, perhaps he didn't really want to show up himself. He's in a very awkward situation, and it seems like he might not actually know what he wants to do. And you could understand that. I mean, that's not really, it's not that I sympathize with him, but it's very delicate.
It's an understandably fraught situation.
Yeah, and although he tries to maintain a strong posture in many cases, he's not especially deft in international affairs, I would say. For instance, one of the first things he did upon taking the leadership of Saudi Arabia was launch a disastrous war in Yemen, which is still playing out on some level, right? Although the Saudis themselves have pulled back from it. It was terrible, right? It did not go well for Saudi Arabia at all. And then he was sort of, kind of throwing his weight around with the Biden administration. But then as soon as October 7th happened last year, suddenly he was just seemingly at sea. He didn't really seem to know what to do. And that wasn't actually the first time. It just was the first time that he seemed to understand that he might be out of his depth.
All right. So MBS wasn't there, but again, Reuters, Chinese President Xi Jinping and Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi were there, and they met just 2 days after New Delhi announced that it had reached a deal with Beijing, so India and China, to resolve a 4-year military standoff on the Himalayan frontier. Is this where neither side can carry anything more lethal than sticks and stones?
I think they have knives also,
Knives,
right? Yes,
yeah,
but no firearms, essentially.
So that's good news. China and India have this long simmering border dispute, and
Yes.
the 4-year military standoff we would say that's only the latest iteration of what has been a decades long kind of
Certainly,
border
yes.
situation.
Yes. I think that I don't think it's any coincidence that it was resolved this week, right? It's like, oh, hey, what a it's the same time as the summit. What do you know about that? It does help, but again, it is a decades long dispute, but I don't think anybody really thought that it was going to blow up into a full on war, just because it would be in nobody's interest for that to happen.
In fact, sorry.
Now that doesn't necessarily stop a war from happening, right? But it didn't really, I didn't feel like it was a great danger.
Other more intense conflicts also were on the agenda at the BRICS summit. Reuters, Putin told BRICS leaders that the Middle East was on the brink of a full-scale war after a sharp rise in tension between Israel and Iran. Thanks, Vlad. Not breaking news there.
Yeah, nothing gets by him.
Right. Ukraine. BRICS leaders, again, Reuters, BRICS leaders did raise the Ukraine war with Putin in different formats, but there was no sign that anything specific would be done to end the conflict. BRICS represents an interesting tapestry of countries who nobody's condemned Russia.
None of them, no.
To the best of my knowledge, because they have kind of delicate trading partnerships with a country that is being economically isolated from the West.
That's right. And I mean, here and there, they'll say, we need a future of peace or something like that, right?
Who doesn't?
But they won't go into much detail about it. And I think it's shameful, right? Because all that, especially as time goes on, all that Russia really has to offer anybody is oil and other, fossil fuels. And we're looking at a situation going forward where people aren't going to need that as much. And as time goes on, I think more and more people might start to say, okay, do we need to sort of chain ourselves to this
belligerent autocracy?
But for what? I mean, granted, like we said before, India and China are always going to be Russia's neighbors, regardless of what happens. So they kind of have to, have some kind of Chinese
development. As Chinese development in battery technology develops, Russia's oil will be less and less valuable, especially in those two markets.
Exactly. And so, for instance, I'm glad you mentioned China. I'm looking at the Global Times from today right now.
Oh, I forgot to do that. Sorry.
No, that's quite all right, because you know what? You might not have bothered. Here's a headline on the Global Times, and it says, BRICS says new centers of power, policy decision-making, and economic growth are emerging. That's the headline. If you click through to the story, here's the story. New centers of power, policy decision-making, and economic growth are emerging in the world, BRICS countries said Wednesday in the Kazan Declaration issued at the 16th BRICS Summit. This trend paves the way for a more equitable, just, democratic, and balanced multipolar world order, and provides more opportunities for emerging markets and developing countries to benefit from universally beneficial and inclusive economic globalization, the BRICS countries said. That's the entire story on the Global Times. 2 paragraphs.
Thanks, Global Times.
Yeah, each of which only contains one sentence. All right, here's another headline on the Global Times today. The headline reads, Xi attends BRICS Plus leaders dialogue. Click through to that story. What does it say? It says, Chinese President Xi Jinping attended the BRICS Plus leaders dialogue on Thursday. Xi arrived in Russia's Kazan Tuesday for the 16th BRICS summit held on Wednesday. That's the entire story. All right. Now, John, you may not have looked at the Global Times today, but you have looked at it in the past. Have you ever seen a story that short on the Global Times? Not
the Global
even
Times,
close.
Of course, is the English language online newspaper published by the Chinese Communist Party.
Yes.
Yeah. So, no, that's very succinct. I mean, it's just PR boilerplate. Usually the Global Times is a little bit more insightful than that.
Yeah, and they'd say something about, what a great leader Xi is, and and on some point, right? I
Yeah,
mean,
and what jerks the U.S. are or the West
and
is.
yeah, now mind you, these are the top two headlines on the site, right? But there's no story. It's almost like nothing to see here. And so you'd think that an organization that China sits at the head of would get more coverage on the Chinese Communist Party propaganda newspaper website. Apparently not. And I thought that was just fascinating, right? That the Chinese Communist Party doesn't really seem to want people to know about this. Although, I mean, it's like, because we're not going to hear about it someplace else?
Yeah, but it is interesting they're not leaning into it like a show pony moment because they, like the Russians, love to project this image of global engagement.
Yeah. And so it sort of seems like they're keeping their powder dry, right? They don't want to go out on a limb and talk about anything in any detail that happened at the summit because apparently sort of seems like not much did, right? They just sort of had a summit. And to be fair, this is the first one they've had since they doubled their membership, right? So there's got to be a lot of growing pains and kind of adjustments to welcoming everybody. And, how do you, oh, we need more chairs or whatever,
How do we download the BRICS Plus streaming app?
Yeah, exactly, or whatever, right? I mean, there's things that they have to get used to doing, right? And so as time goes on, this might end up being more important than it. Although I should say, having Antonio Guterres that's kind of a big deal,
that's
right?
a good get.
That was something that was widely commented upon across the world, and some people were saying, "Oh, he shouldn't have done that," right? I mean,
I disagree.
Okay, I kind of disagree too, but I can understand the case for saying that he shouldn't have gone. I mean, Vladimir Putin is a wanted war criminal, right? And he's hosting the summit. It is sort of a bad look, I think, for the Secretary General of the United Nations to go to his country. If it had been someplace else, right? If the BRICS summit had taken place in any other country, I would say it would be fine for him to go.
Putin probably
But
wouldn't have been there. Well, maybe,
if it
depending.
was in China, I think he would have
Sure.
gone,
Yeah.
right? Or even man, that probably maybe not Belarus.
Belarus or someplace, but
Well, but
they're
they're
not
not
in
in the
it.
club.
Yeah.
Yeah. But still, this was again the inaugural summit of the expanded grouping. We'll keep an eye on it in future years to see what else might happen amongst them.
Speaking of expansion, Putin during the summit said more than 30, many countries have expressed a desire to join the BRICS. This is Reuters, though there was little immediate clarity on how the expansion would work. There was also BRICS predicting its influence would grow and outlined common projects ranging from a grain exchange to a cross-border payment system. Again, big on ideas, low on specifics.
Yeah, it's all pretty anodyne, right? I mean, for instance, apparently discussions about a BRICS currency went nowhere. I mean, we keep hearing that there's ideas of the BRICS countries having their own currency as a counterweight to the dollar, but I don't think anybody's going to be able to do that. That might have been easier to do if they hadn't expanded, right? I think that the Saudis and the UAE in particular, and India for that matter, probably aren't all that keen on having a BRICS currency. It would be easier now that Argentina's not in the
I was
group.
just going to say addition by subtraction if we're talking currency by
Absolutely.
getting rid of Argentina.
But nobody really seems to have a lot of appetite for this. I also don't think it's a coincidence that the United States announced during the summit that North Korean troops are now being trained in Russia. And people seem to think that they're going to be deployed in or near Ukraine. And so, in a way, this is sort of the U.S. kind of subtly saying, okay, this is the club you're joining, pal, right? I'm now, obviously, North Korea is not going to be in the BRICS, and they're not going to be in any club anytime soon. But they're known to be, allies or at least, not hostile to at least three members of the BRICS. They're allies of Russia. They're supplying Russia with weapons. They've always had good relations with China. And so, and I think there was just, again, sort of a kind of diplomatic dig at the grouping.
Any other BRICS chatter, or can we move over to the Moldovan election?
I'd love to talk about Moldova for a few minutes anyway.
The map is going up now, Moldova, which our podcast colleague Bill Crystal incorrectly said bordered Russia on the Bulwark earlier this week, but they issued a correction.
Because it does not.
Yeah, it's all right. Bill Crystal's been wrong before.
Yeah, sorry.
Although he's made the right decision about United States. Yeah, fair enough. Enough about Bill. Moldova, former Soviet republic, 2.4 million people, 130th biggest economy by GDP. Okay. I am paraphrasing a Reuters report. President Maya Sandu said Monday that Moldovans had won, quote, a first battle and a difficult fight for their future. Essentially, Sandu won a plurality, but not an outright majority in her race against a Russian-backed opponent for the presidency. And so there's going to be a runoff. And then there was also a referendum that narrowly got above 50% that allows for Moldova to join the EU. I have that right?
To apply to join, yes.
Apply to join the EU. And of course, Russia blatantly was attempting to influence the outcome of this election to the point where reporters were talking to people who were openly on the record as saying, that man over there said I got 500 or 1,000, whatever the monetary unit is for doing this, right? Was it rubles? I've forgotten now from
I can't remember either.
Yeah. But like people were openly having their votes bought and then were complaining that the payment wasn't coming quick enough.
That's right. So, he stiffed me.
Yeah. Show favorite Ursula von der Leyen, the president of the European Commission, welcomed the outcome of the referendum in a post on what I still call Twitter. Quote, in the face of Russia's hybrid tactics, Moldova shows that it is independent, it is strong, and it wants a European future! Exclamation point. I guess, am I just overly sensitive to this? They're close to Russia. Like, of course there's Russian election interference, but
well, not only that, there's a sort of ethnic Russian enclave in the east of the country, that right along the border with Ukraine, I believe.
Ukraine,
and they're called Transnistria. And they've always had a strong separatist identity. There are many Russian speakers who live there, left over from Soviet times. So I think this might have been the source of Bill Crystal's confusion, right?
Sure.
And so a lot of the people who voted against both Sandu and the referendum,
and joining the free world,
yes, are people from Transnistria, and of course it's a very small country, so it doesn't take a lot to sway an election. But it does seem as though Moldova, as you might expect when their next door neighbor is being invaded by Russia, is generally trying to speed along their transition towards the Western Bloc. And the Russians are doing everything they can to try and stop this. And one thing I learned this week about Moldova, which I didn't know before, is that prior to the end of World War II, they were actually part of Romania.
Yeah, Greater Romania. I also learned that.
All right. And in fact, they speak Romanian. That is in the non-Russian speaking part of Moldova. Their national language is actually Romanian. The only reason they're not part of Romania is just because of geopolitics at the end of the Second World War. And Romania is, of course, a member of the European Union themselves.
Sure. Tough for Moldovans. Are you Russian? Are you Romanian?
Well, I think that
there's a lot of that in that neighborhood.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. I think that it might depend on what language you speak, much as it does in Ukraine and other post-Soviet republics.
Sandu had said earlier there was, quote, clear evidence that criminal groups backed by, quote, foreign forces hostile to our national interests had aimed to buy off 300,000 votes. This is reporting from Reuters. So what you referred to as the application to the EU, the official, and I'd have to say rather self-congratulatory term is formal ascension. And
I think it's accession, actually.
Or accession, excuse me. Accession.
It's
yeah.
not
I want it to be ascension.
I know you want it to be, but it's
formal
not.
accession. Yeah. So they had started the long process of formal accession talks in June. So the result means a clause will be added to the Constitution defining EU accession as a goal. So the
Yes.
Moldovans have amended their constitution. The runoff for Sandu is on November 3rd. So that's going to be an election-heavy week.
Yes.
Against former Prosecutor General Alexander Stoyangolo, who won about 26% of the vote, and he's the Russian-backed candidate.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Moldova. Who knew?
Yes. She's expected to win, although
Yeah.
she was expected to win an outright majority in the first round, and she did not. And
well, hey, I guess 300,000 votes has its price.
Yes. Yeah, and the referendum was thought to pass much more strongly than it did. So this interference has had an effect on the politics of Moldova. But of course, that's not the first time this has happened in any post-Soviet republic.
Sam, in 100
outside
years,
of the Baltic, that is.
Right. In 100 years, are historians going to say that Russia was waging a quiet global war against everybody from, I don't know, the minute the internet cooled into a recognizable thing?
I think they might very well say that. Yes.
I mean, like since 2005 or something?
Yeah, I would say they're basically doing that now. And so as time goes on, but like I was saying before, what will anybody need Russia for? Except that they have an enormous land mass, and you just don't want them to be a problem, right? Because they have nuclear weapons and can threaten people. But that's it, right? And I think that's part of the reason that Putin has been so aggressive in recent years. And I know I've said this on this show before, right? Is that he understands that there's no reason for Russia to be a powerful country without fossil fuels being in widespread use across the world. That's his fault, actually. He could have tried to diversify his country away from fossil fuel use, but he didn't. Other countries have done this. Norway is now driving a majority of their cars on their road are electric. Now, Norway's a very small country. It's not like every country can do this. The point is, a transition to a non-carbon economy is doable. It can be done.
Especially so when you have a command economy, when you have an autocrat who just declares this
China's
policy.
doing this now, right? I mean, and I think that might be another source of the embarrassment on the Global Times, right? It's just like, I mean, do we have to go to Russia? Do we have to keep doing this? Now, that's just speculation on my part. That's not based on any actual evidence that I have. That's just a little story I'm telling you folks. But again, that the headlines on the Global Times about BRICS, they're baffling to me, right? I've never seen anything like that. And it's not like I read the Global Times every day, but I do check in pretty regularly. Those are the shortest stories I've ever seen on there, and I have to wonder why.
Anything more on Moldova, or would you like to pivot to the Boeing strike?
I'd like to talk about the Boeing strike. We'll return to Moldova in future days.
Very exciting, though. I was happy to learn about Moldova.
Yeah, it is interesting.
About which I have not had many opportunities or reasons to research.
No,
okay.
I mean, why would you?
Boeing. This is AP reporting. Striking Boeing workers have rejected a new offer from the plane-making giant. The offer included a 35% pay raise over 4 years. The International Association of Machinists and Aerospace Workers said 64% of its members voted against the proposal. More than 30,000 of Boeing's employees have joined the walkout. Started back on the 13th of September. Earlier, Boeing's boss, Kelly Ortberg, warned the company is, quote, at a crossroads. No kidding, Kelly. And losses at the firm have surged to roughly $6 billion US.
Yes.
I mean, I'm flying an Airbus to Honolulu in a few hours.
Yes, but you would be flying a Boeing if that
I would. I'm going to be flying a Boeing back.
Okay,
but again, I have had my what would it be? Revanchist? What my kind of nostalgic rant
atavistic, perhaps?
Atavistic rant about Boeing losing its prestige. That's an earlier episode if you need another dose of that nonsense. But
yeah, it's just a shame. I mean, and by the way, I think this was yesterday or 2 days ago, one of their communication satellites exploded in space.
Exploded, which could be dangerous.
Yes. No,
Yeah.
forget could be, is dangerous,
yeah.
right?
Well, will be dangerous when it collides with something.
Yes, right. That we don't know what's going to happen to that debris. I mean, this is just one thing after another with Boeing, and it's difficult to see what their way out of this might be. But there has to be one. It's not going to be a good way out. They won't be allowed to fail. We might expect out of a sense of basic fairness that they should be, but that's not going to happen. And
well,
so,
who would service Air Force One? I mean, what a metaphor. What a metaphor. The United States is flying its leader around on a 50-year-old plane technology from 50 years ago from a company that ought to fail.
Yeah, that's on its knees. And so I think this leads to a general sense of what we might call malaise, right, in our country, right? And for instance, as we recalled over the weekend, Donald Trump pretended to work at a McDonald's. And then the next day, there was an E. coli outbreak in several. Now, that was not in the same place, in the same McDonald's location where Trump pretended to work.
Trump was not found responsible for the E. coli.
And, I wish that he were, but he's not, right? But these things are sort of, things don't feel like they're operating well around here. And I think that bothers a lot of people. And it's probably not good for someone like the incumbent vice president, for example.
Ortberg had another great quote. Remember, Ortberg took over as CEO of Boeing in August. Quote, "This is a big ship that will take some time to turn. First of all, you're an airline manufacturer, so we're using naval metaphors. But when it does, quote, it has the capacity to be great again." He really said that.
Well, look, I mean, first of all,
listen, it's hard to be the CEO of Boeing.
Yeah, I don't know.
I mean, listen, I couldn't do that job.
Yeah, exactly. And so I guess, I don't know much about Ortberg, but I don't think he was the first person they asked. Let's put it that way. I'm sure there are plenty of people who are like, yeah, no, thanks. I have other things to do this year. But we'll have to see what kind of rescue package is put together for this. This thing is just terrible. I mean, I want the workers to get the best deal they possibly can, but I hope they get it quickly, right? Because the longer this goes on, the worse it's going to be.
Again, the United States is better when Boeing is functional.
Man, I guess. I mean,
our economy, yes, our national prestige, yes,
fine. I mean, there's a lot that's going to need to change around here for our national prestige to be able to recover. Well, and Boeing is just one of those things.
This is the second time that the striking workers at Boeing have rejected a proposal deal in a formal vote. The previous offer, which precipitated the strike in September, was turned down by 95% of workers. This one was only shot down by 64% of workers.
Only 64% of them did turn down this one. So that that's progress, right? I mean, the offers are steadily getting more appealing. Maybe the next one will be better.
Anything else on Boeing, or would you like to pivot to our caption, which I will adroitly insert?
Okay. I just want to revise and extend some of the remarks we made in our recent episode on immigration, during which we discussed the plight of Haitian migrants in Springfield, Ohio, whom former President Trump had defamed by accusing them of eating people's pets. And we mentioned that they were here under temporary protected status. And I speculated that if Donald Trump is reelected to the presidency, he might try to end that status. And so I want to apologize to our listeners for having entirely forgotten that during the first year of his presidency, 2017, Trump actually already did try to revoke temporary protective status for migrants from Haiti, El Salvador, and Sudan, and I think one or two other countries. And I was reminded about this over the weekend when I happened to be watching television, and a documentary appeared on my local PBS affiliate. And it's part of their series VOCES, which John, as the Spanish speaker on this podcast, I believe is can you confirm that that's the Spanish word for voices?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And so the series is called VOCES. The episode was called Almost American. And I would recommend this documentary to anybody. Now, I might add that it's 90 minutes, so it takes some time to watch. But it goes through the intricacies of the procedures through which the Trump administration attempted to end temporary protected status for these migrants, as well as the lawsuit that was launched against them by a number of migrants themselves under the auspices of the American Civil Liberties Union and the National Day Laborers Organizing Network. This went through the courts for years and was still, in fact, in court at the election in 2020. And so if you want to find out more about the whole history of the temporary protected status program and how it played out in the previous Trump administration and its status today, which is still sort of in question, by the way, I cannot recommend this documentary highly enough. And I know everybody's very busy. They might not have an hour and a half to watch this, but I would make time for it if you can. On the PBS, it's not on YouTube. On the PBS website, it says that it's available on Amazon and iTunes, which I didn't know still existed. And it's possible they just haven't updated their website to say Apple TV or whatever, maybe there is still on iTunes. I don't actually know. But for instance, John, if you were to be, say, on a plane, you might have time to watch this. But I would recommend this to anybody.
One reason you might have not immediately remembered that Trump had attempted to do this to immigration policy in 2017 is that all the oxygen was sucked up by the Muslim ban, which I actually said in a conversation to somebody the other day. Hey, remember the Muslim ban?
Right.
And then I said, I can't believe I just said that. Remember the Muslim ban.
Right. So, but so many things. I mean, I think the pandemic kind of like sort of wiped so many other things off.
It very clearly has.
Yeah.
And it's erased many people's memories.
Yeah. But one thing I would add, though, since you bring up the Muslim ban and while we were talking about the temporary protected status, the person who was in charge of both those operations, the Muslim ban, it was John Kelly, who's in the news this week for almost calling Trump a fascist, right? Or dancing right up to the edge of calling him one and maybe dipping his toe in that water. I just wonder, I'm glad he did it. I sort of wish he'd be more upfront about it and actually go on television and talk to the American people about it. But I just want to remind everybody, John Kelly, he's not a good guy, right?
Yeah.
And if
not nor a liberal.
That's right. And if he's maybe seems a little bit reluctant, that's why.
Okay, we're barreling towards the election. We'll be back next Friday. He's Sam, I'm John. Have a great weekend.
Thank you, everyone.